We are glad, again, I appreciate all the work that's been done this year to have our various missionaries be able to visit with us throughout the year, and we'll continue to encourage you to consider that faith promise opportunity, whether you have already made that decision or you want to use that card for next week. We can put those in the plate. And this morning we're glad that Chris and Nisha Irwin can be here. They were here with us last night. Grateful. I thought I'd heard Nisha say it's 27 years come full circle. Is that? Said to him, 28 years. Said when we first started this, he said we didn't have any kids and it was just the two of us and we're out sharing the vision. And now 27 years, 4 children, 2 continents, 3 countries, 4 ministries later, come full circle to again. So it's just been a joy to serve with them. Many of you know the story. We were able to worship together in youth group in high school, went to college together. They spent decades in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, serving the church there and establishing churches in South America and now in Spain for several years. And now just recently even in England, working to build missionaries and training. And now even another chapter that they'll share with us today for the future. You know, we've been praying for Chris's mom and their family in the middle of writing a book, in the middle of doing his doctorate work. So much to share and so many ministries which have encourage them and equip them to come and share. So we're glad that they can visit. And Chris, if you would come and preach.
Well, good morning, everybody. Many of you have no clue who we are, really. If you're new to the church, we only appear once every 3 years, and we pop in and we visit and we express our thanks. We try to share about what we do. We try to encourage you as well. You are faithful partners, as Kevin said. 28 years ago, 29 years ago, we went out with the desire to serve the Lord overseas. And what do? If you're a missionary who needs money, you hit up all of your friends and your family members. And so we contacted Kevin and Denise and said, hey, we want to come visit with you. We want to share a vision that we have to reach out to the world with the love of Christ. And you guys were one of the very first churches who came on board. And it's been 28 years, as Kevin said, 4 children. I thought you were going to go into the list of animals that have come and gone. And I thought that will take a long time. I would say that, have you ever had one of those years where everything's just been turned upside down? Like you can look at 1 year of your life and you're like, that year is the year that my life just made radical turns. And 2018 has been that year for my family for various reasons. So for those of you who stick around in Sunday school, we'll be going into detail with what some of those reasons are. 2018 has been, I would say, our most difficult year. The year in which many of our plans were realized and then many of our plans were suddenly just cut apart. And it's a year where we should be, at this point, at the end of the year, in deep counseling, probably. And yet, I was telling somebody I feel more at peace than I ever have, and this was even back in July, when we didn't know where God was leading us and what was going on. I was saying, I still feel like God is with us, and He's just showing us just the few steps we need to take to move ahead. So we're going to be sharing all of that with you in the Sunday school time. But this morning, in sharing a message, we'll see if I can get this thing going. There we go. I don't know about you. If I was a wealthy person and I had money to burn, I would be a map collector. I'm fascinated by maps, old maps, like really old maps, and I'd have a room all in wood paneling, not wood paneling, real wood all the way through. And I would look at maps, and this is a map that most of us are used to seeing. These are the ones that appear in our school books. Of course, this is another map, and where do you think this map, in what school book does this appear? Australia. Australia is right down there. They kind of move the map around so Australia's in the middle. Unlike, our map, we have the U.S. right there. Australia makes sure they're right there in the middle. The map's a very interesting thing. Of course, it's not accurate. If any of you ever watched the show The West Wing, I never really watched it, but I saw one snapshot of it, and it fascinated me because they said, our maps have sold us a lie. Our maps are not accurate. Now, of course, we live in a globe, so anytime you spread open the globe to do a map, it's not going to be completely accurate, but they're really not accurate. They do not portray the world as it really is. And so a guy at Peters came up with the Peters map, the Peters projection map. And it shows land masses according to their actual size. Now, the map makers who came from Europe, they made Europe look bigger than it is. And it made certain other countries look smaller than they are because Europe, of course, is the center of the world. It is the most important. So we'll look at the next one. Let's see here. All right. This is the world according to landmass size. This is the map that was hidden from us that we've never seen in our school books. And you can look at just how massive the continent of Africa is. And you can see in a lot of our maps, when we come over and we look at up there, is that Greenland or Iceland? I can't remember which one's way up there, that huge mass. When you really look at it, it's not that big. The U.S., which seems really big, or North America, is not that big. And to give you some understanding, who knows this country? This is Australia. This is Australia superimposed over the United States. And so you get to see just how big Australia is. This is Brazil in relation to the size of the U.S. And so you can again get a picture of size. Now, this isn't really fair. This isn't countries. Well, it's countries within a continent. But just to give you an idea of how big Africa is. There you can see all of China, the U.S., India, Great Britain, Japan, all of the countries, Spain, where we're at, all fit within the continent of Africa. It's just immense. Of course, if you go outside of our world, if you were in space, they would say there's no north and there's no south, there's no east or no west, there's no orientation. And we have been back. My parents have had health issues. They both have Alzheimer's. And in January, I suddenly found myself leaving Spain to come home to find a home for them to live in and to take care of them for 2 months. And I thought it was just my stepdad or my stepdad who was with Alzheimer's. But while living with them, I recognized that my mom also was not right. Something's wrong. And in 2 months of living with 2 Alzheimer's patients, I was going crazy. Like the conversations that would happen at night, you go from laughter to just in tears, you know. And I realized my entire world has been shifted upside down. And then I noticed on Facebook, and being here in the U.S. for our home assignment, listening to all the political stuff that's going on, watching the posts on Facebook, it is like our world has gone mad. It is like we are so polarized and we are so divided, and I find myself getting angry about things that really don't have anything to do with me in my daily life. You get consumed if you watch the news, if you listen to the thing. And so the question is, how do we live life in an upside-down world? Because it is. From the moment creation sinned, the moment we sinned, our life was torn apart, turned upside down, and God has set about a plan to restore it. And those of us who have joined with God in His plan to restore the world, we still live in this upside-down world. It's not just that God comes into our life and He helps us live better. He helps us live in a way that we can bring healing to the world, that we can try and restore the world. And so I want to talk about understanding life in an upside-down world. And let me give you what I would call hard truths. And these are truths that have applied to us on the mission field. This is what we've seen. The truth about the church. In today's world, very few are interested in the church. It used to be in American society that our neighborhoods were built around, or churches were built pivotally placed within communities. Churches had a high prestige. They had a high place in community. It was the place where community events were held. People would meet together in the church. In today's world, we are a dying breed. We have churches all over. They're not necessarily growing. And now we're starting to see more and more people who don't view the church in a high place. Whereas if you present yourself as a minister, where that maybe 20 years ago still had a certain amount of esteem, in today's society does not. And so we're seeing, especially within America, we're seeing a real shift in the power of the church. And the reality is very few people seem to be interested about the church. And the truth about our life is a testimony. There was a time in missions when it talked about friendship evangelism. And it talked about you just need to live your life. It's not just about what you say. And that's very true. If you talk about Christ but don't live like Christ, your message is null and void. But they began to sell something else. All you need to do is live like Christ, and people would be attracted to you and want to know what's going on. And when we moved to Spain, we found something very interesting. Many of you know, and we've talked about this, Spain's considered a Catholic country, but Pope John Paul II, before he died, said they are not a Catholic country. They're a pagan country. Almost everyone we know is a Catholic, but they will say, I'm an atheist Catholic, or I'm an agnostic Catholic. Virtually none of our friends ever attend Mass. It is not like Catholicism in America, right? And that's why the Pope said they are neo-pagan. They're not even Catholic anymore, right? And what's really impacted us moving there is we've had this belief that, God has created us with a God-shaped whole, and without God, our life is incomplete. All of that is true. But we move to Spain, and we find families that seem to be doing pretty well. They love their neighbors. They love their families. They try to be good, moral people for the most part. And an interesting thing is young people who have joined our team to do internships, it is not uncommon within a year of being with us that they begin to have doubts about their faith. Missionaries begin to question, is there really a God? Do I really believe that God exists? And do you know why? Because they're surrounded by people who seem to be doing okay. And these people don't have a relationship with God. And so the idea that if we just live as Christians, we will attract people to the kingdom, that's not playing out. There's lots of good moral people that are trying to live good moral lives without God in their life, without recognizing that. The truth about knowledge, we tend to be hearers of the word, but not doers. We tend to be hearers. So a lot of our teaching when we went to seminary, 100% of all of our classes were us sitting down, studying deep theories, critical thinking. But we had the expectation that if we preach the right things, it will show in the way we live. That's the expectation. But the reality is that we are a broken people. We are a lazy people. We are a people who love to receive and think about deep things and come to new realizations, but it's not always fleshed out in the way that we live. We tend to focus on right belief, but not right living. And then the final truth about ourselves, we need accountability. We need people in our lives. The Christian life is not easy. The Christian life is difficult. And we need people in our lives to encourage us. And so when we talk about living in an upside-down world, here's what we need. In your bulletins, you can follow along. We need to understand our context. And I want to talk about that for a minute. And this will be the longest of the 3 points that we deal with. We're going to read 1 Corinthians 1, 26 through 30. It's right here. And this is a description of us, right? Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Those key words. God works in mysterious ways, and he talks about who he has chosen. And he used words that he's chosen the foolish, the humble, the weak. That's who God chooses to work. And I want to start out with one of the things that we do in Spain. We are big on telling people Bible stories. we learn Bible stories from the Bible, and we just talk to people, and we'll say, hey, that reminds me of this story. Let me tell you this story. So I'm going to tell you a story that it's probably my go-to story. I tell anybody I meet this story. It's some way I can naturally work it in. I can finagle a conversation. And it's a story you all know, the prodigal son. All right? So I'll just tell you the very simple recitation. There was a man who had 2 sons. One day the youngest came to him and said, Dad, I want my inheritance. I want it now. The father says, all right. He gives him his inheritance. And the young man goes off to a distant lands where he wastes all of his money on wild living. At that time, there came a big famine in the land, and he didn't have a job, had no food to eat. The only job he found was giving food to, waste to pigs. People would come and they would dump their food to the pigs, and he was so hungry he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. But nobody would give him anything to eat. It was at that point that he thought back to the house of his father, and he said, how many servants do my father have, and they don't even miss a piece of bread? And he said, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go back to my home, and I'm going to tell my father, Father, forgive me. I've sinned against heaven and against earth, God and you. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Take me as your servant. And so he went back home. His father's out in the field, and at a distance he sees his son coming. And it says that he runs toward his son, and he embraces. He takes his son into his arm, and he cries out for joy. And his son says, Father, forgive me. I've sinned against heaven and earth. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Let me be your servant. But the father says no, and he calls his servants and he says, bring in new sandals, new robe, the family ring, because my son was dead and now he's alive. He was lost, now he's found. Kill the fatted calf for a celebration. And that's what happens. It's at this point in the story that the older son comes home. He hears the music. He sees a celebration. He asks one of the servants what's going on. And the servant said, your brother has come home. And your father has ordered the celebration to kill the fatted calf. And the older brother gets very, very angry. And he refuses to enter. His father, noticing this, goes out and he says, son, what's going on? And the son says, Father, how many years have I obeyed you in every single thing? And you've not even given me a little goat to have a celebration with my friends. But this, your son, who has wasted your money on wild living and prostitutes, has come home. And you killed the fatted calf. And the father looks at his son and he says, son, you know that I love you. Everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate. Because your brother was dead, now he's alive, he's lost, and now he's found. I've told that story to many people in Spain. One, a very strong atheist woman, but when I told her the story and I talked about the father coming, she burst into tears. They're powerful stories. And one of the interesting things is that's one of the most common stories we have. It's one of my favorite stories. But if we really want to understand the context in which we live, let's start with this story. This story, as many of you may already know, it's preached on quite a bit, is not about the prodigal son. It's not about the son who left and came home. Have you ever thought of that? It centers around the son who left and came home, but that was not the purpose of the story. At the time, Jesus is talking to the religious leaders, and the religious leaders are critical of his work and the way he's working, and in the midst of that, he tells the story. This story isn't about the son who left and lived a horrible life and then came home. The son is about the one who apparently was doing everything right. It was the one who was obedient in everything. When Jesus told the story to the religious leaders, he was focusing on the real prodigal, the real one that was not with the father in the end. The real story is about the older son, who even though he was doing everything supposedly correctly, in the end, he was not in the party with his father. And Jesus was saying very clearly, you can criticize me for the people that I'm ministering to, but you who are the spiritual leaders are the ones in the end who are out. That's the context. And so many times we miss that. We focus on the beauty of the story of the one who's left and come back. But I, as a leader, as a missionary, as a minister, when I read this, I read it for me. Be careful, Chris. You may think you have it all together. You may think, but Jesus is talking to the religious people, the religious leaders. And I think as a church, we need to understand this. This is a passage with a very real warning to religious people. That you may think that you're doing all the right things, but where is your heart? In the end, are you celebrating with God? Are you in the party with God? Are you actively there? And then taking it to our story. When we look at this scripture, we have to understand where we are. The story's not about the son that left. And then when we look at our story, our story is captured best when we're fully dependent on the Father. And this is where I'm excited for you as the American church. You guys have made our ministry possible. That's what this Sunday of Faith Promise is. The exciting thing that's happening in the American church, because it is no longer a power player in the culture wars, right? The church is no longer a heavy player with heavy influence, right? We've lost that position. So what does that do? When you lose power and you're living in a broken world that is unjust and unfair, what happens? You cry out for help. How many of you here have made the Haiti trip with this church? Okay? And what is the one thing that you come away with? In the midst of all of the despair, look at the joy. Look at the dependence upon God. And so when I come back home and I see the madness of our political thing, I see the madness with immigration, I see the madness with all these things, instead of getting angry, I just recognize, wow, God, we need your help more than ever. We're not going to depend on our power. We're not going to depend on our strength. It's not going to be up to us to win a culture war, which God in the Bible never asked us to fight. Instead, now that we are fighting from below, that we don't have the power, we depend on God more. When we find that we're living in an upside-down world, we cling to God more. And all of you have experienced this. At some point in your life, you're living your life, you're struggling in the day-to-day, you're walking with God, and some crisis hits. And in the moment that crisis hit, life and death crisis, did you care at all about your mundane problems? Did you care at all about the rest of the problems in the world? No. At the moment of life and death crisis, you cry out to God and you say, oh God, help. I remember in graduate school, we were in Wheaton. I'm in a class when I get the call, Daniel's been hit by a car. All right? He's being taken to... At that moment, I didn't care about school. I didn't care about our supporting churches. I didn't care about the work in Ecuador. All I cared about was my son. So there is a dependency upon God when we cling to Him out of need. And so I look at this, having lived in 2 countries where churches did not have the power, where churches were a minority. I've shared before, we live in a village and we're surrounded by 26 other towns, 26 towns around our village of up to 20-some thousand people, and there's not one church in any of them. Not one. Our daughter's grown up without a church, without a youth group. It's just our family. So we've learned very well what it means to be the weird ones, the only ones, and you're out trying to still share your faith, even though people say, well, you're a cult. You're foreigners. You're not like us. And so you come to cry out to God, God, we need you. It has to be you. And so I get excited when I see all of the mess and that the church is no longer the power player it used to be in society, because I say the church is going to then say, God, we need you. And one of the pivotal times we started in Ecuador, we started working with a group in our home, very different from a traditional church. And we fasted, we prayed for this group, and this group grew. And the longer I worked with this group, the more accomplished I felt, like I can do this. And the more accomplished I felt, the less I prayed. Because I can do this, I can lead a small group. In the beginning, I didn't know if I could lead a small group, so we prayed and we fasted before every small group meeting. But as time went on, I felt better. I can do this. And so I prayed less. So I look at the world, the context that we're in, and I say, we work better as a church when we're fully dependent on the Father. And then there's another thing the powerless do. The powerless cling to God. And this is a great Moody quote. Francis Chan has repeated it. Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding in something that doesn't really matter. To come to the end of your days and recognizing I've succeeded at many things that in the end didn't really matter. Let's succeed at things that matter. And then the powerless cling to one another. Even though we're fully dependent on the Father, we need each other. I can't do this without you. If there's one negative that our children, I think, have taken away from the mission field, it's the belief they've seen us always trying to relate to churches, but when you move to a place and there's no church and it's just your family, but all of our children kind of look at the church kind of like, well, why do I need the church? Now, they wouldn't say that, but I look at their lives and I'm looking at the choices they make and I'm saying, you can't do this by yourself. But they're saying, well, our family's done it by ourselves. And we're like, no, we haven't. We've had supporters praying for us back at home who take care of our needs. We have teammates that we meet with. The powerless, when we're powerless, we need each other. So that's the greater context. If you're going to live life in an upside-down world, you need to understand that God didn't choose you because of all of the power and all the talents that you have, all the gifts that you have. He chose you for the opposite. We have to understand our identity. So we understand where we are. We're in an upside-down world. We are people without power. And so we cling to God and each other. But then we have to understand whose we are, who we are. And let's start with the passage. In the story, you have a son. He's privileged with standing, with authority. He leaves his home. He recognizes his unworthiness to return, but his father receives him anyway. So I want to go back. And I want to go back away from that story to the Old Testament. This is what God told the Jews, right? Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So God is talking to the Jews. They don't even have a country. This is in the Old Testament, right when we're starting out. God chose to intervene in the world, to save the world, and He chose a country to do it. Now, if I were going to give you, let's say I had something I wanted to sell to the world, and I said, pick a country who's going to be able to take this product to the ends of the earth. What country would you choose? You would choose the most powerful, the most influential culture and country. You'd probably choose ours, or maybe China, right? You're going to choose one of the biggest and baddest. God had a message to the world, and He chose a people that didn't even have a country. And this is what He tells them. You will be for me my treasured possession. And I think Israel liked that. Who doesn't want to be a treasured possession? Oh, we're going to be God's treasured possession. Even though He says, although the whole earth is mine, you'll be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. God chose Israel from the beginning to be priests. Now, those of you from religious backgrounds, maybe you grew up Catholic or something, you understand the job of a priest. The job of a priest is to help people connect to God, right? That's your job. So God tells the Jewish people, I've chosen you out of the whole world. Even though the whole world's mine, you're going to be my priest. And they never got it. Do you know that when you read mission books, they'll say missions is a New Testament concept? It's totally wrong. But they say, because you never see it in the Old Testament. Outside of Jonah, really. You never see God telling the Jews, it seems like, to go out, and they're going out. It's only in the New Testament when you have the Great Commission where God says go. And so missiologists have always said, and theologians, well, in the Old Testament, God drew people to Israel. And in the Old Testament, He sends Israel out, the church. And yet, from the very beginning, God is saying, you're going to be my kingdom of priests. You're to go out. They just didn't do it. They never really got the message. They liked being special, chosen, but they never understood their role as a priest. They never understood their true identity. Now, this is a map that I think I've actually shared here before. Why Israel? This is a map. The blue part's the Mediterranean. The star's where Israel is. So let's just talk about why did God choose Israel, a people without a country, and then He gave them a country. Why there? In the Bible lands, all those circles are empires. You have, of course, Egypt, but you have the Babylonian, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Huge empires. And God placed Israel right in the midst of all of them. There were two roads that connected all the empires, and both of those roads went right through Israel. So God said in the Old Testament, I'm going to send you out as priests. They didn't obey. So what did God do? He placed them at the crossroads of empires. He placed them directly. The only way those empires could interact by land runs right through Israel. Divinely placed at the crossroads of empires. Now, let's shift to the New Testament. Remember the Old Testament. Now the New, 1 Corinthians 1:26 and 27. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were called when you were called. Not many were wise, not many influential, not many of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, the weak things of the world to shame the strong. 1 Peter. And this, any Jew, when they would read this for the first time, would go right back to Exodus 19. This is exactly what would happen in their mind. You yourselves are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's special possession, so that you may proclaim the mighty acts of the one who has called you. Any Jew reading that would go right back to Exodus 19. It's the same language. And I told Kevin and Denise, I decided to look up, when I wrote the sermon a couple weeks ago, I said, I wonder what I preached the last time I was in Alexandria. This was one of the points, the same map, everything. A different sermon, but it's the same point. Because we've learned in missions that the church will only grow when her members understand their role as priests. So the question is not whether you are a priest. You are a priest. The question is, what kind of a priest are you? What kind of a priest are you? You're a priest. And here's another reason I get excited. All right? I get excited because many of you who've lived long enough, you had dreams that maybe you did not meet. Expectations of your life that have not been fulfilled. Here is the wonderful thing about life with God. I remember in Ecuador, we said we were going to plant 20 churches in 20 years. In 18 churches, we planted 5. Right? I was going to have written 2 books, and I'd written none. Right? I had these plans. And you think, well, once I get married, I'll be happy, or once this, or once that. Many of you are in jobs you do not enjoy. Many of you are working a job, and you're thinking, this was never my dream as a little girl, to do what I'm doing today. Many of you are struggling with family issues. Many of you may be struggling in your marriage. Many of you may look at your life and say, this is not at all where I thought I would be. And the beauty of it is, God has said, no matter where you are or how you got there, I have allowed you to be there, and I've divinely placed you, just like Israel. I divinely placed you at the crossroads of people's lives, where you can act out your priesthood. No matter where you are, whether it's where you even want to be, God is saying, with me in your life, I've allowed you to be where you are. And you are to be a priest within that, the crossroads of all the people who surround you in your life. We need to understand who we are. The prodigal understood, in the end, what am I doing here? Where did I come from? I'm going back to the Father. I'll also say one of the things I get excited about in America is the American church now. In America, if you look at a lot of the books being written now, they're starting to say, America, we need to learn what missionaries do overseas because our country has become a mission field. And think about this very quickly. Put aside whatever political belief you have. Put aside whatever judgment you have about a wall or about immigration. We're not talking about whether you're in favor, you're against. Put all that aside. God chose Israel and He placed them at the crossroads of nations, empires. If I were to put a map today to show you where people are traveling to, what country is in the middle of all of it? The United States. We are a country, for good or for bad, the nations are coming. Their nations are coming. And as a missionary, As a person, I can say, well, I don't agree with this. I don't like this. I think we ought to do this. But as a Christian and a missionary, I'm like, holy cow. We're trying to send people all the way over there. They're coming here. What an amazing opportunity. Where else are we ever going to have that opportunity? For you all to fund a missionary to go overseas, we need $50,000 to $80,000 a year. But people are coming here. Do you know most of the foreign students, especially Islamic students, those who come from Muslim countries, they come here for study in all the universities, big groups. They come here their first 3 months, they're so excited because they're like, Americans are so friendly. We're just amazed at how friendly everybody says hello, they're polite, and they're just overcome. But within 5 months, it's the total opposite. They think we're hypocrites because everybody's friendly to their face. Nobody invites them to their home. Many of these students come for 4 years and they've never entered an American's home. And so they go back to their country and they say they smile and they act nice to your face, but nobody really knows how to be hospitable. And yet I've traveled in many Muslim countries and they are the most gracious, hospitable people in the world, being held hostage themselves by terrorists. So I look at the world and I look at America and I say, not only are we going to depend more on God, look at the opportunity we have to reach out to these people who are coming. We also have to understand our purpose. Our purpose. Now you have a little square. And when I looked at the last sermon I did, I'm pretty sure this was there. In your bulletins, there's a little square and you're going to do a little drawing practice. This is something we teach to everybody that we work with. All right? We're going to tell you a little story about Israel. I do this with everybody. My kids roll their eyes. When I told my daughter, who's not coming with us on these trips, she's 18, she's like, no, I'm not going on any of your trips to churches. She's like, are you doing the Two Lakes story? And I'm like, yes. She's like, I do this to everybody. If you and I were going to hang out for a day, I guarantee you, at some point I say, hey, let me share something with you. So you're going to draw this out in that little box. You have to draw a small. I want you to draw a small circle, and then a line, and then a bigger circle. That's the first thing. And this is what I do with every single person I meet and have a relationship with. I say, I want to share something with you about Israel. Now, in Israel, there's the Sea of Galilee. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. You got the Sea of Galilee, and at the bottom you've got the Dead Sea, so you can label that. And in between you've got the Jordan River. And I want to talk to you about the Sea of Galilee. There's fish in the Sea of Galilee. It's very childish, but I make them do it. Like I'll do it, and then I'll have them do it. And so just draw a fish in your little Sea of Galilee. Filled with fish. Then you got to draw some trees around it, because if you go to the Sea of Galilee, there are trees, there's nature, there's wildlife, there's animals. It's green around there, even though it's deserty, but there is some green there. Then you need to draw a couple houses, because there's towns and villages, especially in Jesus' time, all around there, right? As a matter of fact, draw a couple people, because Jesus got almost all of his disciples from here. This is the region where Jesus got his disciples. So if we look at the Sea of Galilee, we see that it's filled with life, right? Filled with life. Now let's look at the Dead Sea. Put a couple X's inside the Dead Sea, because there's no life in the Dead Sea. That's why they call it the Dead Sea, right? Then put a couple X's on the outside, because there's no real trees, there's no wildlife, it's all desert, it's all dead. Put a couple X's on the other side, no towns, there's no villages built around the Dead Sea. Now, to be fair, if you've ever gone, you do need to write tourism on one side. And when you go to where the tourists go, they have high-rise hotels, and they have a green area with some palm trees that they water 24/7 to keep them alive. But if you take out tourism, there's nothing there, right? And so the interesting thing is, the Sea of Galilee is filled with life. The Dead Sea is completely dead, but it's the same water. Water from the Sea of Galilee flows down the River Jordan, empties in the Dead Sea, but one is filled with life and one is filled with death. And the question is why? Now, the first time the person did this to me, I thought, I don't want to ruin your illustration, but okay, I'll explain it to you. I explained it all wrong. I said, well, you have to consider the elevation. You have to consider the minerals and the salt. You have to think about the sun and the properties of the sun and evaporation. And that all contributes, and I said it, and they're like, no, actually, that's not true. It's actually the lowest place in the world. The Dead Sea is the lowest lake in the entire world. So it's not the elevation this way. There are minerals and salts, but that's not why. It could still have life. So why doesn't it have life? And then they explained to me very simply. The Sea of Galilee has water coming in and water flowing out. The water flows down the Jordan River, empties in the Dead Sea. It's filled with the salts and minerals, and it just putrefies and stagnates. And there's a general principle here for life. And the person who told me this, it changed my life. He said, what is the lesson there? If we want, first he asked, what do you want your life to look like? Which one of those? Well, obviously, I want to have abundant life. I want to look like the Sea of Galilee. And he said, then there's a key. In order to be like the Sea of Galilee, anything that comes in has to go out. Anything good that you receive, Chris, is to give to somebody else. Any lesson that you learn in church is to pass on to somebody else. Anything that is good is to be passed on. And we do it naturally when we see a movie. When we see an amazing movie, what do? We tell people. We talk about it. Because it's the natural way of living life and enjoying life. If you are to experience the abundant life that God has for you in your role of a priest, you must let the power of God flow through you. If you just receive, you stagnate, you'll never fulfill the divine purpose of your priesthood. Most of our culture within the church is receiving. We go to seminars, we read books, we listen to Christian music, we receive, with the expectation that we will push that out, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't naturally happen. Spain has been a real struggle because even though I love preaching and teaching, I'm an introvert. If I don't have to talk to people, I'm perfectly happy. And in Ecuador, we were the only white people, and Latins are very friendly. They came to us. In Spain, you don't talk to people you don't know. When you pass somebody by on the street, you don't even make eye contact. If Kevin and I are sitting down in a cafe out on the street, and one of Kevin's friends comes by, they'll talk for 10 minutes. Kevin will never introduce me. You don't do that. And I love it. I don't have to talk to anybody. But it's kind of hard to start a church and win people to Christ if you're not talking to them. Right? And so what I needed to learn was, Chris, anything that you've received is not for you. It's to give to somebody else. So one of the first principles we teach everybody we work with is, number one, your role as a priest. Right? You need to understand that God has allowed you to be where you are at the crossroads of people's lives. And there are people that you're at the crossroads of their lives that I'm not in their lives. So that's your territory. That's the place, the people that God has given you to be a priest. Now, secondly, what do? You live out this principle. You're not trying to win people to Christ. Obviously, we want people to come to Christ. But by receiving and giving, I do this for me. It's very selfish. If I want to have abundant life, whatever I receive, it's to be given. But I talked about understanding our purpose is that we are very selfish. So one of the things we do, and I'll be finishing with this, we not only teach everybody we work with to recognize they've been called as a priest. That's the first thing. And they were called not because they have great talents and God needs them. We were actually chosen because we're not strong and we're not wise and we're not powerful. Because God wants it to be His strength, wisdom, and power that shines through, right? So He's chosen us as priests. They have to believe that. I'm a priest. And I've had, especially from the Catholic world, I'm a priest? Like, holy cow, I don't want to be a priest. Yeah, but that's what you are. And then, wherever you are, whether you're happy or not, God is saying, I've allowed you to be there. I've placed you at the crossroads of people's lives. That's your church people. That's your sheep. So here's the third thing we do. Okay, how do we reach them? We make a list of 100. All right, so we give people a sheet that has 100 lines on it. And here's what we say. If I was doing it with you, I'd say, okay, everybody take 5 minutes, write down the name of every family member on this sheet. All the family members that you're in touch with, have a relationship with. When you're all done, write down the name of every friend that you have. When you're all done with your friends, write down the names of every church member that you're a part of in your church. When you're done with all the church members, okay, list the names of all of your coworkers. When you're done with the coworkers, okay, list me the names of all the people that you come in contact with, all of your neighbors, the people you buy, from the store from, if you get gas at a certain place or you pick up your mail at a certain place, all the people, and I can even, in my list, it could be bread guy, because there's a guy that sells bread, let's say. I don't even know his name, but I put him there. Those are the sheep that God has placed in my hand. So we identify. And then we need accountability. We need accountability. Here's what we do. Once we do that, I meet, and I'll close with this. We need accountability. We understand who we are. We understand what our purpose is, but then how do we accomplish that purpose? To do the two-lake principle, to live that out, doesn't come naturally for me as an introvert. I need somebody to push me. So I meet with several people, and we have an accountability group. We all know what that is. You meet together, you talk about your life, but there's 3 important questions. So if Kevin and I are doing a chat group, we call them chat groups. I can't remember what it stands for. But it's 2 to 3 people, same sex. And the first time we meet together, we want to be people who are in the Word. If I'm a priest, I need to know the Word. So Kevin and I'll come to an agreement. Kevin says, I want to read 10 chapters a week. I'd be like, wow, I can't do that. I'll do 5. All right, 5 chapters a week. So when Kevin and I meet together, here's what he's going to say. How did it go? Did you read? Easy. If I say no, then we stop and we pray. God, help Chris to, fulfill his commitment, change his times. Then the second question, what is one thing that God taught me? He's going to ask me, what's one thing that I learned? So now you're not just reading, you're reading to receive something. Then the third question, who did you share that with? Because whatever I receive is not just for me. And there's a time where I'm going on the way to my meeting, I realized I didn't share with anybody. So I stopped at a little store where I buy, and there's an Indian kid in there, about 20 years old. I always laugh, his name's Vaca, which in Spanish means cow. And he's from India, right? So, but it doesn't mean that in Hindi, right? So I go in, I'm like, Vaca, I've got to tell you something very quickly. And I told him something good that had happened to another missionary, like an answer to prayer. And I said, you got to help me real quick. Something really neat happened to a friend. I want to tell you about it. And I'm sure as I walked away, he was like, that was really weird. Right? But I knew I'm going to meet with my accountability partner, and I promised God that whatever I receive from God, I'm going to give to somebody else. And it totally revolutionized the way I think. To recognize I'm a priest, to recognize that God has placed me in a community to serve, and then to try and live that principle out. So whenever we study the Bible, at the end of studying one of these stories, like the prodigal son, here's what we'll tell people to do. Get out your list of 100. We're going to take time to pray. Pray in silence for 2 minutes. And you're going to look at that list and you're going to pray for the Holy Spirit to reveal to you somebody on that list that needs to hear the story of the prodigal son. And at the end of that time, you will share who that is. Now, if you haven't got a name, then pick one. Just pick. And then we all say, I feel led, or I've decided to share this story with this person. All right. And we pray, and then we practice telling the story to each other, and we go out. And the next time we meet, how did it go? It's that principle. Whatever I receive is to give. Those are the ways that the church is going to continue to expand from below. The original church was built upon people who were illiterate, poor slaves. And it ran through empires. So I'm not worried about the American church. You guys are going to be just fine. It may not feel like it, but it's going to require you to live at a level of faith, intentional faith that you've not had to do before. And I'm excited to see what God does. I want to thank you guys for your support and partnership. Because while we may disappear from your lives for 3 years, every month when I do the budgets, or every time that we're lonely, we think of all of you who support. And we can only do this because of what you guys do. And we are just so grateful for your partnership over these 28 years. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that you've not only saved us, but you've redeemed us regarding our purpose. God, this life is hard. And you've seen where each of us have arrived to the point of our lives where we presently are. And you know that for some of us, it's not at all the life that we expected. How wonderful it is, Father, that even in those circumstances, you are still there and you're still saying that we're not only to live, but to live with purpose. I thank you for this congregation of priests. Lord, help us. Pray for those people in the list of 100, if we were to write them down. Lord, help us to not only receive, but to make sure we're also giving in an intentional way. And God, I want just to ask that you would speak to us specifically about the people in our lives. Bring to our mind those moments when we've received something from you and we think that is new information, or that is praiseworthy, whatever's good, whatever's right. That we not only think on it, as Paul says, but that we ask, who is this for? Who can I share this with? That's what we need, Father, to complete our role as priests. Saving's up to you. But our testimony and giving testimony of you is up to us. Help us and guide us. Amen.
Let's all stay together as the worship team's coming to the front. And if you know that this is an opportunity for you to commit your life to the Lord, if you know you haven't made that decision yet and you would like to come this morning, we invite you. We will sing together. I think that's the will come to the altar. And then you can come to the front.
was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Bear your cross as you wait for the crown. Tell the world of the treasure you found.
Do hope that you can stay with us this morning. We'll take a break. We'll go out, get a drink, restroom, and then we'll ring that bell, come back in here. All the adult and the high school, middle school, we'll all meet up here with Chris and Nisha this morning, and then we'll have regular services and youth groups tonight and Wednesday. And I hope that you will have your eyes open to those people that God will place in your life this week where you might cross paths with Him. It may be unexpected. We had a great time yesterday at the hayride, and it was beautiful up there the whole time. And when Denise and the Irwins left our house, it was pouring rain and cold and nasty. And up where we were, it was dry and nice. So just bear in mind that it might be totally unexpected in just a few minutes from where you are. Stephen, is there anything else you need to add for high school or tonight?
I think Bob and Carrie will teach tonight. We'll teach Wednesday, so kind of a regular week.
And also, Bob and Carrie have 2 more seats left at their table for the Heartbeats fundraising banquet dinner. So if you're interested in that, they have 2 seats remaining at that table. Would you pray for us, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, God. Thank you that Chris and Nisha could be here today to share, God. And God, we just pray that as we go from here, that you guide and direct us, God, that your name be on our lips, God, and that you work through our strengths, God, but even more so, God, that you work through our weaknesses so that it is inevitable that it is you shining through. God, we love you and thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I couldn't help but think as we close, we've had 2 straight weeks of funerals, and Mary Lou's funeral was this week, Steve's mom and Stephen's grandma. And a couple of the songs in the service came to my mind from the funeral. Amazing Grace by Chains Are Gone, and what we'll close with I'll Fly Away. And I've been thinking, Mary Lou loved to dance. And we know that she's dancing this morning on the streets of gold. Let's sing together, I'll Fly Away.